We welcome you back to this channel. In this video, we will explore stories of stalking entities, dark forces that relentlessly follow and terrorize their victims. Go ahead, turn off the lights, and let's take one more step into the world of the unknown. In our first story, a guest in an apparently peaceful house faces the terrifying vision of a man with white eyes, triggering a series of paranormal events that no one could rationally explain.
The man on the third floor.
Have you ever had something so terrifying happen to you that you didn't want to go back to that place? Some time ago, one of my best friends moved to another city near mine and invited me to visit him and spend the day with him. He lived with his sister and her 2 children in a 3-story house. I went to visit them, and the day passed quickly. I didn't realize how late it had gotten. It was already dark. My friend insisted that I spend the night at his house, as it was not wise to travel alone in the dark. I agreed. They asked me to sleep on the couch, which was quite damp. I asked them why they didn't use the rest of the house, as it was quite big. They didn't give me a proper reply, and I ended up going to the 3rd floor, where there was a very large room with 3 old iron frame beds. According to my friend's sister, they had never used that floor, but it was all clean and well kept. I lay down on one of the beds in the corner and soon fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of iron scraping. When I opened my eyes, I saw something moving in front of me, and I was startled. Quickly sitting up, I looked around in fear. On another bed, I saw someone sitting. It realized it was a man. At first, I thought he might be a relative or friend my friend hadn't told me about, but he was wearing dirty, tattered clothes. His shoulder-length hair was messy and white, and he had a long, unkempt beard. He looked more like a homeless person than a relative. Additionally, he was constantly staring at the ceiling. I approached him with an angry gesture and asked who he was and what he was doing, but the old man continued to stare at the ceiling, motionless. I approached him and put a hand on his shoulder in anger. As I touched his shoulder, he turned his head towards me. It was the scariest moment ever. His eyes were pale white, with no eyeballs visible. He didn't look human at all. I recoiled and stepped back, falling to the ground. But when I quickly looked back, there was no one there. But I heard a noise on the wooden floor from behind. When I looked, there was no one else there, just my friend's cat, Kira. Kira entered the room and started hissing, her fur bristling. She jumped onto the bed where the man had been sitting and started scratching it forcefully, as if she was still attacking the man. Then she jumped to the other bed and continued scratching, as if she was trying to attack something invisible. Kira's behavior made me even more scared. Unable to bear it any longer, I fled downstairs to the 2nd floor. Luckily, my friend was still awake. I told him everything that had happened and what I had seen. He explained that they had always heard strange noises since moving in with his sister, which was why they avoided staying upstairs. This had been happening since they moved in, but they didn't know the origin of the noises, and since it stayed on the 3rd floor and didn't bother them, his sister had decided she could live with this entity, whoever it was. My friend was also okay with it. At that moment, we decided it was best for me to sleep in the living room. They set up the sofa for me and gave me some blankets. I tried to sleep, but I found it really hard due to what had happened. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard Kira hissing again. I turned to look and saw her bristled, jumping on one of the sofas in the living room and scratching the air for a while until she calmed down. It was as if she could still see that man who had now come downstairs, following me. Because of everything that happened, I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I returned home. Thankfully, nothing else happened to me. But that night, while I was sleeping in my room, I woke up again in the middle of the night to the sound of that old iron bed moving. It sent chills down my spine. I opened my eyes. I saw the same man with those pale white eyes, his face close to mine. Without looking away from me, he shouted, "Never come back ever again." and then vanished in front of my eyes. I can never forget that scene. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever witnessed. Now, when I need to see my friend, we always meet at a cafe or he visits me at my apartment. We can meet anywhere as long as it's outside that house to which I never want to return.
The second story takes us to a dark pact with a supernatural entity, marking its protagonists with physical scars and sinister presences that persist in their lives.
The new neighbor.
When I was a kid, something happened that made me believe that ghosts do exist, even though I didn't before. I was 15 at that time, living with my parents. We had neighbors who were quite religious, and they had a son my age. I met David at church for the first time and became friends. We used to spend a lot of time together playing, and he used to tell me a lot about our religions. Then one day, another boy joined our group. He was David's cousin. His name was Albert. He was sent to live with David's parents, who were his uncle and aunt, because he had a very rebellious attitude. They hoped that staying there would help him become better. When I met him, I didn't find him rebellious. Instead, I found him very quiet and introverted. We became friends, and then the three of us started spending time together. During that time, he never did anything that seemed crazy or rebellious at all. One day, while we were just having a regular conversation, Albert told us about a very strange encounter he had when he was younger. It was about a being that he couldn't quite describe what it looked like. He believed it might have been a goblin. This entity claimed it was being punished with that form and had a curse upon it. It asked Albert to help fulfill its punishment. At the time, he agreed and accepted the offer without fully understanding the consequences. This entity then coerced Albert into doing things that his parents mistook for rebellious behavior. Although Albert claimed he didn't want to carry out those actions, the entity forced him to do so. As a result, his parents sent him to stay with his religious uncle and aunt, hoping their community could help him. I thought he was kidding, but David took Albert's story quite seriously. He encouraged Albert to confront the entity and break the pact he had made with it. However, Albert denied the entity's presence, stating that he no longer felt its influence since coming to David's house, and that it no longer disturbed him. After that, they never talked about this again. At least, not in front of me. About a month passed, and one day, our parents went out to dinner together, leaving the three of us alone at David's house. We were watching TV when suddenly Albert started acting strangely. He got up from the couch and started staring towards the stairs. When we asked what was happening to him, Albert said something that scared both of us. He claimed he could feel the entity in the house, stating that it had followed him all the way here. At first, I didn't want to believe what he was saying, but the expression on his face and the fear evident in his sweat made me realize he was telling the truth. Then, without saying anything, started heading upstairs. David asked him where he was going, and Albert replied that he was going to confront that entity and end the pact. When David tried to go along with him, Albert asked us to stay in the living room and went alone to the second floor. After a while, we heard a blood-curdling scream from above and rushed upstairs. We found Albert in the hallway, and in that moment, we also saw a black silhouette, dissipating like fog, disappearing until we reached him. We helped Albert up, and then I noticed his arm was injured, with the worst scratched scars. Blood was coming out of it. We took him and administered some first aid. When we asked him what happened, he told us that he had confronted the entity and told it that he no longer wanted to continue with the pact. Surprisingly, the entity accepted the deal but told Albert that as a consequence, it would leave a lifelong mark on him. Then, the entity attacked him, injuring his arms. After that, he didn't know what happened, and he went unconscious. That day, I witnessed that black fog-like entity disappearing. and there was no way that Albert could have caused those scratched marks himself. It was some otherworldly entity. Fortunately, those marks disappeared afterward, and Albert's attitude improved greatly from that moment on, and he returned to his parents' house. Now, when I return to my parents' house, I sometimes meet David and ask about Albert. He is now living a normal life, but David mentions that he could sometimes see a dark mist disappearing while passing through the second floor. However, the last time I met him, I noticed the same marks on his arm as well. I don't know what happened to David, and I didn't ask him much about it.
In the third story, an encounter in a remote village reveals the presence of a child with red eyes and fangs, lurking in the shadows with a disturbing persistence.
The red eyes.
Those bloodthirsty red eyes still haunt me to death and do not let me sleep at night. When I was younger, we used to go to my father's town, the one he originated from. It was a small town with more ground and field rather than the hustle and bustle of the city. We went there each year, specifically for that festival where people in the area hold a big parade in the streets. It was always fun to see this and be a part of it. That year, Alex, my cousin, came along with us to see all this stuff. We arrived at our house, and after having a meal, I took Alex to show him around. As I was showing him the town, we saw a group of children playing soccer on a small field. They were the same age as us. We approached them and asked if we could play with them. They agreed, and we played the whole time from late afternoon until dusk. When we finished playing, it was already getting dark. Everyone said goodbye and returned to their homes. While I was about to leave, I noticed a child who was still sitting there all alone on a bench, looking downwards. I was worried about why he didn't return. I approached the boy and asked him why he wasn't going home. He kept looking down. I put my hand on his shoulder, and he looked up. He had fangs and blood-red eyes, and his skin looked as if it were peeling paint. It seemed so unreal but heart-wrenching as well. I got really scared. My heart almost stopped beating. It all happened in just one moment, and I just turned around and started running towards where my cousin was, trembling and nervous. Watching me in that condition, he asked me what happened. I had no courage to turn around. I just pointed behind me towards the bench where that boy was sitting. My cousin looked around and asked me what I was talking about. I looked around, and there was no one. He was gone. I kept on convincing him that I had seen a very scary-looking boy, but he didn't believe me and thought I was just kidding. He took me home, and thank God nothing else happened. The next day, we went to the parade with my family and cousin. It was a big event, and so many people appeared. We let ourselves go and enjoyed the event, mingling with the crowd. It was then that I saw him again. I saw him standing among the people, looking at me with the same scary blood-red eyes. But when I talked to my cousin again about the child to show him, he disappeared. He kept appearing in front of me among the people and would suddenly disappear in the blink of an eye. The whole celebration went like this. I just kept running from him, and he kept following me. He appeared everywhere I went and then disappeared out of nowhere. It was a bad day. I got really scared and just forced my cousin and parents to return home. They asked me what happened, but I didn't tell anyone as I knew no one would possibly believe me. Not knowing the reason, my parents assured me that we would leave the next morning. At night, I got up because I wanted to use the bathroom. My cousin was sleeping next to me, so I decided not to disturb him, even though I was scared after all those events of the day. The bathroom was in the corner of the hallway, and my room was in the other corner. While I was going there in complete darkness, I saw the same red eyes in the other corner of the hallway. My heart was beating 100 times a minute. I was so scared. I decided to go back to bed and not go to the bathroom. I locked the door and didn't sleep for a moment for the rest of the night. Every time I tried, I just felt like he was somewhere around me in my room, looking at me from a distance. The next day, we returned to the city. As we were leaving the village, that was the last time I saw him, through the back mirror of our car, looking at me with those eyes. I never went back to our town again. My parents asked me several times, but I always refused. I always found a reason to stay here and not join them. To this day, I still wonder what that entity was and why it was following me.
Thank you for journeying with us through the dark passages of these stories. If you enjoyed them, give us a like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more tales of terror. Visit our channel to discover more incredible stories and let the fear continue. Remember, in the shadows, there are always more secrets to unveil. Until next time, where fear will once again be your companion.